This audio is about emotional health. Just a few days ago, somebody asked me what I actually meant when I used the term emotional health. Now, I found this really interesting because this was someone that I would have considered to be pretty emotionally aware. Someone who's very tuned into their own feelings and very tuned into the feelings of others as well. Someone that I would consider to be emotionally sensitive and very empathic. And from this conversation, I realised that we don't really have much of a common language or a vocabulary that talks about emotional health in a way that's widely understood. We don't widely talk about or define emotional health. We use the term mental health, and of course we talk about physical health, but we very rarely talk about emotional health. And yet our emotions are absolutely integral to the way in which we relate and engage with our world. When we talk about mental health issues, we're not just talking about the way that we think, we're not just talking about our mind, we're talking about the way that we feel and the way that this affects us. And I think it's fair to say that we all know that if we're feeling emotionally stressed or emotionally vulnerable and unstable, that this will have a massive impact on our physical health as well. To have a healthy mind, we need to be in a healthy emotional state. We need to be feeling all right. And this in turn impacts on our physical health and our physical state of well-being as well. So both our mental health and our physical health, our mental and physical well-being, are actually reliant upon our emotional well-being. They're underpinned by our emotional health. When we talk about being mindful of things, and when we teach people about mindfulness, what we're actually trying to do is to enable them to train their mind to be more reflective and to be more aware of what's going on, both in and around them, to develop their sensitivity and their empathy and their ability to listen, both to themselves as well as to others. And it's our emotions and our feelings that are informing this process. I've been listening to people for well over 24 years now, and of course the people who come to see me are coming because they don't feel very happy, they're not okay. In fact, sometimes their lives may actually be in quite a significant state of emotional crisis. But you know, the one common denominator that I find, regardless of each and every person's individual circumstances, is that every single person is struggling to relate to what they're actually feeling. They don't understand their emotional experiences. In fact, even when their feelings are completely appropriate and a natural response to the kind of things that are going on in their world at that time, they're feeling utterly overwhelmed. And they don't know how to handle this. They don't know how to cope. They lack an understanding of why they're feeling this way, and they have no language, no emotional language, and no emotional vocabulary that will enable them to relate to their own experiences, to relate to their own emotions, and to understand and engage with what's actually going on for them. Now, our emotions are always live. They're always online all of the time. And the way that we're feeling is actually continually informing us. Our emotions and our emotional experiences are a kind of navigational system. We're having a continual emotional interaction with whatever is going on around us, and we have an emotional response to this as well. But if we have no emotional language, if we haven't learned to relate to our emotional experiences and to listen to what we're feeling, then we won't know how to interpret this information. We'll be lacking a vital skill that will enable us to navigate our lives and our life experiences successfully and with relative ease. Now, our emotions also fuel our actions. Sometimes people get into very deep water because they find themselves being very emotionally reactive. They react without thinking. They lack a kind of internal pause button. And these kind of reactions, this way of reactive living, is always highly emotionally charged. Our emotions generate a huge amount of energy. When we can take action that's reflective and thoughtful and based in choice, rather than an emotionally charged reaction, then life tends to run much more smoothly. Again, when we talk about being mindful, What we're trying to do is to enable our mind to take charge and channel our emotional energy. We want our mind to consciously take charge of our actions. So our emotions are always online and they're always live. And because they are so key in impacting on our state of mind and in every sense of our well-being throughout our entire life, it's pretty important that we develop and learn and sustain a good understanding of what we feel. The health of any relationship will be reliant upon a good level of communication. And this actually includes the relationship that we have with ourselves and the way that we relate with our emotions. To be able to have a full and emotionally rich life, we're going to need to develop a healthy relationship to the way that we feel. We need to develop a good, healthy relationship with ourselves and with our emotional experiences. And to do this, we're going to need to develop a fluent emotional language. Language, if you think about it, is descriptive. And in its descriptive form, it creates a link between experience and thought. It can help us to define something and to make sense of it, and then to hold it in our mind. It's like a vehicle that enables us to gain a greater understanding or a greater comprehension of something. Having an emotional language and an emotional vocabulary is a valuable life skill, and we need to have this in our toolkit. It creates the link between our emotions and our emotional experiences and our mind. I have found that many people have real difficulty talking about their feelings and making sense of them. Now, this isn't because they're not intelligent. It doesn't mean that what they're feeling and experiencing is actually in any way unnatural. It simply means that they've never learned a language to do this. They've never been encouraged to develop a relationship with themselves which allows them to understand their own emotional experiences and to process and understand what's going on for them. If we grew up in a world where our parents didn't have an emotional language themselves, not because they were bad or inadequate, but because they'd grown up in a world where their parents had no emotional language either, then this particular life skill, this incredibly helpful life skill, will be missing, and we won't be well equipped. In my experience, many people don't know how to recognize and interpret what their feelings are telling them. They haven't learned to recognize and understand their emotions in a way that's helpful or thoughtful or empowering or safe. In fact, sometimes they've learned the exact opposite. They've actually learned to be frightened of what they're feeling. Now, this takes me to something that's particularly interesting, because when we feel something and we're confused and frightened by what we're feeling, maybe we don't understand it, we just don't get the way we feel, or sometimes the emotion we're feeling has a really bad memory or a really bad association attached to it. Then when we feel this primary emotion, it actually generates a kind of secondary emotional reaction. It's like a secondary set of feelings. It's an emotional reaction to what we're already feeling. Let me give you an example. If you're feeling anxiety but you don't know why, or maybe anxiety has a particularly difficult or bad association or a difficult memory attached to it for you, or maybe you've experienced a panic attack at some point in the past. When this happens, some people actually then develop a fear of feeling anxious. They become afraid of feeling that way. So the moment that they start to feel any kind of anxiety or any unrest, they then become frightened of what they're feeling. And this immediately adds a secondary package of fear to an already difficult and challenging situation. They've actually just turned up the intensity volume and effectively doubled the emotional load. Here's another example. If you grew up in an environment where you experienced anger in a very negative or violent manner, then when you grow up, you may find that anger in any way, in yourself as well as in others, can be absolutely terrifying. So if something happens in your current world, something happens now, even if it's something that you should justifiably feel angry about, instead of knowing that this is okay and responding to the situation appropriately, you may actually start to feel frightened about the way that you're feeling, frightened of being angry. So we started with anger, and by being afraid of the anger, we've just added a secondary package of fear. And again, this will turn up the intensity volume and effectively double the emotional load. This can also happen with our thoughts. Our feelings can generate thoughts, and our thoughts can generate feelings. They create a kind of loop. When you feel something, let's say something that's emotionally challenging for you, if the thoughts that you have about it are understanding, reflective and caring and supportive, then the chances are that the feeling you started with in the first place, the challenging emotion, will feel better, or at the very minimum it's likely to stay at the same level of intensity. So although there's a loop between your thoughts and your feelings, the loop is actually containing. You feel safe. It has some limits around it. It's not getting any bigger. The intensity volume isn't being turned up. Now, let's say that something is emotionally challenging for you, but the thoughts you have about it are judgmental and full of criticism and blame. Then the chances are that the feeling you started with in the first place, the challenging emotion, it won't get better. It won't feel better. Indeed, the chances are that the thoughts you're having will be generating that secondary package of overload. They'll be doubling the load and feeding the fire. The intensity volume will be going up, and when this happens, the loop spirals and it gets bigger and bigger. So it's not a containing loop. There's no safety involved, and there are no limits involved. Difficult feelings are generating difficult thoughts, which in turn create more difficult feelings, and so on. So our ability to interpret and understand what we're feeling is tremendously important, because if we don't understand what we're feeling, we're very likely to generate this kind of secondary emotional response. How we interpret what we're feeling, and how we respond to what we're feeling, and how we actually feel about what we're feeling, will make a massive difference to our ability to cope with any particular situation that's carrying an emotional charge. It will make the difference between being fazed by what we're feeling or being able to handle the way that we feel. I said earlier that our emotions are a kind of navigational system, and it's an extraordinary system. Everything that we feel is vital and important to us. Everything that we feel, every emotion we have, is giving us information. The way that we perceive and interpret our emotions, and the way that we relate and integrate our emotional experiences into our lives, will either generate emotional resilience and the possibility for reflective thought-through choices, or a way of living that is not thought through, and a way of living that's emotionally reactive. When we live in a manner that's emotionally reactive, it's as if some part of us is on autopilot and we're not fully in charge of ourselves. Developing an emotional language and a healthy relationship with our emotions can put us back in our own driving seat. The kind of relationship that we have with our emotions can either help us to navigate successfully through life, making informed and appropriate choices, or not. And as I've already voiced, the way that we feel, our emotional health and well-being, has a direct impact on both our mental health and on our physical health. Let's go back to the way that we use language and the way that we describe our emotions. It seems to me that emotions are frequently talked about in a very limited and a very black and white kind of language. We frequently hear them described as either good or bad. We feel good today, or we feel bad today. We feel positive, or we feel negative. Our mood is high or low. We're up or we're down. To my mind, this is far too limiting and very restricting, as it doesn't allow us to recognise our individual emotions at all, and it doesn't allow us to hear the tremendously important messages that these feelings are actually giving to us. It doesn't do justice to the range of emotions that we have, or indeed acknowledge the importance of all of them. I also think it tends to raise anxiety whenever we feel anything that we perceive as bad, and this can inhibit our ability to listen to what we're feeling and look more deeply for the root cause of any kind of emotional distress or difficulty. So I would like to redefine and reclassify our feelings, still using two categories, two different camps, two different headings. But my two headings are going to be called the easy, comfortable emotions versus the uneasy, uncomfortable emotions. It's not difficult to identify either of these camps, these headings. The easy, comfortable camp is full of the happy, relaxed, joyous, pleasurable emotions, and the uneasy, uncomfortable camp is full of the more challenging, the more difficult feelings we have: fear, guilt, anxiety and anger. I think we probably all know that the easy, relaxed and comfortable camp is where we would like to be most of the time. But of course there are things in life that are difficult and that are challenging. And if we're frightened of the feelings that these situations generate, aside from the fact that we've probably just doubled the load, we're also missing something vital. We're missing some good information. None of these feelings and emotions are bad. Every emotional state that we experience is actually informing us. It's giving us good information, and we need to learn to listen so that we can make informed and appropriate choices, so that we can navigate our lives, even at times of stress and difficulty. So whatever we're feeling, whether it's easy or uneasy, comfortable or uncomfortable, our emotions are telling us something important. It's an important piece of navigational information. And it's there to help us to work out what's going on and how to respond appropriately. If we feel something in the more challenging, uncomfortable camp, and we misinterpret these experiences by simply seeing them as bad, then we're highly likely to make misinformed decisions. We're not listening to ourselves, which means we're not making thoughtful and informed choices. Let me give you an example of an everyday situation. It's a situation that happens to all of us at some point or another, and one in which we're likely to feel emotions that would definitely fall into the more intensely challenging camp. And yet they are so completely natural and so obviously appropriate. If we lose someone very, very close to us, someone we loved very much, then understandably we're going to experience many, many feelings that would fall into the uneasy, difficult and uncomfortable camp. These are very challenging times. And yet we know that these feelings are completely natural. In fact, if we weren't feeling them, we'd wonder what on earth was going on. The intensity of our emotions will be relative to the importance of that person to us. Our feelings will be relative to the quality and the closeness of that relationship. So being able to understand our feelings and our emotions and to be okay with them helps us to process the experience. It helps to ground us and helps us not to be fazed about what we're feeling. It helps us not to add to the problem or feed the intensity. And this generates a kind of emotional durability and resilience, even when times are tough. Emotional health and well-being isn't about being happy all of the time. The basis of emotional health is about being able to understand and be responsive to our emotional experiences, to interpret and use these experiences as good information. The basis of emotional health is to be able to feel the full range of our emotional experiences and be at ease with this. Happiness doesn't come from blocking out our more uncomfortable feelings. It comes from listening to our feelings and attending to them responsively. And this enables us to be resilient and to be okay, regardless of what's going on in our world. In our adult lives, the relationship between our mind and our emotions is the most influential relationship that we'll ever have. We need a strong, healthy relationship with our emotional experiences, and to do this, we'll need to develop an emotional language and a vocabulary that will enable a strong, healthy level of active communication between our emotions and our mind. a healthy level of active communication taking place within ourselves. To be emotionally healthy, we need to be able to handle the way that we're feeling. We need to be able to live in a state of stable instability. We need to know that we can be confidently vulnerable. We need to know that we can be at ease with feeling uneasy, and that we can be thoughtful and understanding of any of our more challenging emotions. Thank you for listening, and take care. This is copyrighted material 2014. Jenny Burgess,